Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Women's Life Stories, we retell those moments, honest every day, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. Don't ever go to Ironwood Hollow, Evie, promise me. For 23 years, Nathan Hale never asked much of me. He fixed what broke made lists that solved the unglamorous parts of life and held his tongue when grief or joy might have said too much. That line, quiet out of place, spoken once on a late drive, stayed like a thorn beneath my skin. I promised then because marriage trains you toward the small kindness of promises. I kept it the way you keep a sweater in the back of a drawer, forgotten until the cold insists. The morning after we buried him, I sat in a chair that wasn't mine, in an office paneled in old oak and anchored by a window that turned the winter sun into a pale coin. Miss Rowe, Nathan's lawyer, tidy as a ledger, rested both palms on a small cedar box between us. Her voice traveled carefully as if words might crack.
Mrs. Carter, there's one remaining item your husband asked me to deliver in person.
Inside a brass key stamped with a faint maker's crest, a maple leaf charm polished by years of pockets, and a white envelope addressed in Nathan's square, meticulous hand. The paper smelled like closets and older decisions. I broke the seal. Evie. If you're reading, I ran out of days. I'm sorry for the hard parts I left behind. There's a property in Alberta I bought 3 years ago and kept apart from our ordinary life. It's called Ironwood Hollow Ranch. The taxes are paid ahead. The deed is good. What waits there is meant for you. There's a computer in the main house. You'll find what you need on it. The files open where they're meant to be opened. N. I read it twice, then a third time for the spaces between sentences. He never mentioned any real estate, I said, and my voice sounded like someone slightly earlier in the day. We had a mortgage and a savings account and a dented Subaru. Ms. Rowe pushed forward a folder, copies of transfers, a title search, a list of prepaid assessments like marching soldiers. He instructed me not to reveal Ironwood Hollow until after his death. The ranch was his childhood home for a time. He reacquired it under a holding company. If you choose to sell, the market is unusually strong. If you choose to keep it, it will keep you. Keep me, I repeated. His words, she said, then softer. There may be interest from parties who consider the property theirs by memory. They are not on the deed. By memory. I could hear Nathan's careful phrasing and that the way he built bridges across difficult ground with quiet nouns. My phone buzzed. Lila's name lit the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then scrolled back to the key. I closed my hand around its weight, and for the first time since we folded the flag at the cemetery, felt something sharpen under the sorrow. Not anger direction. I'll go, I said. Ms. Rowe folded her hands, then unfolded them as if setting something invisible on the desk. If you do, Mrs. Carter, go soon. I called Lila from the parking lot, the wind making a thin harmonica of my car door. She picked up on the second ring. Mom, I need to be out of town for a few days. Are you serious? The edge in her voice had a daughter's right to it. Dad's service was yesterday. I know, I said, and I put as much truth in it as I could. There's a matter I have to handle in Canada. Canada, she repeated as if the word were a dare. Is this about his family? He never talked about them. It's about something he left, I said. I'll call you tonight. Silence traveled between us, then the small surrender of a sigh. Fine. Text when you land. I drove home packed, the way a storm does, quick half-guessing all purpose. Passport boots, black sweater, Nathan's note, the key. The airport was unremarkable fluorescence, plastic coffee lids, the moving walkway that made me feel briefly more efficient than I was. Crossing into Alberta, the air changed its mind about being gentle. The sky spread clean and wide. The radio talked about lake-effect snow and a junior hockey score as if both mattered equally. The farther I drove, the more the land raised its knuckles. Past the last big box store, the map turned into names no one said, unless they lived under them. Cooley, this creek, that range road, with a number that felt like a coordinate to your own smallness. I kept going the road, stitching through foothills the color of tired wheat. A hawk, wind held above a fence line. A gas station sold coffee that tasted like earnestness. I drank it anyway. Ironwood Hollow Ranch announced itself with restraint. Stone pillars, a weathered metal arch. The name worked in iron letters that had outlasted arguments. I rolled down my window, slid the key into the gate's lock, and heard the interior clunk of something old agreeing to be useful. The driveway braided up through windbreak trees, and the hard geometry of old farm buildings made new without losing their bones. To the right, a long, low barn with fresh siding. To the left, a pair of silos painted a quiet gray that knew what it was about. The main house waited at the top of the rise, 2 stories deep porch, the sort of windows that could admit a season hole. I parked where the gravel made that sound all country driveways make, a sound of arrivals that commit.
I stood for a minute at the foot of the steps because standing felt more polite than rushing into someone else's secret.
Inside, the air kept a memory of soap and wood smoke. The entry opened into a great room with beams dark as river water and a stone hearth big enough to ask something of. Nathan had once claimed he didn't understand my love for horses, that he supported what he couldn't name. But here were canvases that caught the exact muscle under a hide, mid-stride photographs that did not kiss nostalgia, but documented its small bronze studies where a hoof lifted, and you could feel the weight of the rest of the animal considering ground. He had arranged a life in a way that admitted mine. On a trestle desk by the window, sunlight gathered around a silver laptop, like a cat that knew which lap to choose. The screen showed a lock icon over a playlist thumbnail, no labels, only numbered tiles the first, with a small blue dot at the corner, as if it had been waiting for the right hour to speak. Next to the computer lay a single red rose, dark at the edges, not yet failing. I set Nathan's note beside it. The handwriting looked too alive to have been written by someone who wasn't. I touched the key to the maple leaf charm and felt the metal weight cold against my palm. A car door shut outside. I didn't jump so much as absorb the sound. Not the single slam of a solitary visitor, but the offbeat chorus of more than one person stepping out, voices confined by courtesy, the way men talk when they want you to know they're here, but haven't yet decided what part to play. Tires canted against gravel. Somewhere a magpie complained about the audacity of engines. I stood very still and listened, the way you listen the first night in an unfamiliar house, counting the creaks so you won't count your fears. Then I closed the laptop, slid the key into my pocket, and walked back to the door I had just opened. The porch boards answered with the honest groan of old wood. At the bottom of the steps, a black SUV idled, exhaust curling in the cold paint clean enough to reflect the sky. 3 men looked up in the same moment, 3 versions of a jawline I had kissed goodnight for decades. Not Nathan, but the people who knew him before I did. I put my hand on the rail as if to steady a house that didn't need me to, and waited for them to climb. They didn't come up together. The tallest started first measuring distance with his eyes the way surveyors do. The other 2 followed a beat, late boots, testing each riser. A 4th figure in navy waited on the drive beside the idling SUV, hat brim, low posture, that tidy kind you only get from uniforms. Mrs. Carter, the tall one, asked, stopping a step shy of the porch. I'm Grant Hale. These are my brothers Victor and Ethan. The name landed with the weight of a door you know is not for you. I didn't offer a hand. You can speak from there. Grant smiled the way men smile when told the rules do not apply. This won't take long. Our family has business at Ironwood Hollow. We notified the provincial court of a dispute regarding estate matters. There's an inspection order. We'll be respectful. The constable approached, then boots whispering over gravel. He touched the brim of his hat. Constable Braden. Afternoon, ma'am. I do have an order permitting a limited inspection of structures related to the property transfer. He held up a plastic-sleeved paper. My role is to ensure it's peaceful. Then you know we'll start with documents. I kept my voice light enough to float, but not to drift. Great room's warmer. Constable only. Grant stepped forward. We'll all... You won't, I said, and I opened the door for the officer, not them. Inside the house received us without complaint. I walked him to the trestle desk. The laptop screen pulsed with that quiet thumbnail again, as if breathing. I set my tote down, pulled the blue folder Miss Rowe had given me, deed title, chain tax receipts, wire proofs, every page wearing its own calm. Braden read in a silence that had work to it. He traced dates with a blunt finger, took in the holding company name, the land description block, with its legal poetry, SE 1422 5W5M. Everything appears in order, he said at last. The inspection order doesn't compel entry in the face of clear title and no evidence of tampering. This looks civil, not criminal. Outside the window, the Hale brothers waited like weather you could see coming but could not schedule. Victor checked his watch on purpose. Ethan watched me expressionless, the way you watch a road to learn if it will hold. I'd like a copy of that determination, I said. I'll note it in my log, Braden replied. If their counsel wants further action, they'll seek it in court. His voice softened half a shade. If anyone attempts to enter without consent, call. The door closed behind him. Gravel murmured. Then the SUV rolled away, not fast. I stood until the sound thinned to nothing. Only then did I sit the blue folder still under my hand, as if it were a small animal that needed warming. The laptop woke with a subtle click. The first tile in the grid brightened, then bloomed into a video frame without my prompting, as if the machine understood I'd finally earned its answer. Nathan appeared against the familiar grain of the great room. Not as I'd last seen him, narrowed by illness. I had not yet named, but as he often was, the solid, ordinary miracle of him. He looked into the camera the way he looked at a problem he had already solved and wanted me to see the path. Evie, he said, if you're in the great room, good. I wanted you there for this one. The air in the house changed shape around his voice. He spoke plainly. He'd been diagnosed 3 years earlier. The name was long and complicated hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a heart muscle gone thick with bad luck. He didn't want to make those years a vigil. He wanted the dailiness to hold. I went looking for a place that felt like before he said. Found the one that tried to make me something I wasn't. I bought it back and made it tell a different story. He talked about Ironwood Hollow, with a mechanic's love, the right pitch of roof for snow, the way the porch caught the western light, and banked it the soil that held onto water longer than anyone expected. He said there were files that they were mapped to rooms. Where you stand will open what you need, he said, and smiled at his own stubborn elegance. If the constable is there, show him the folder. If not, sit a minute and breathe. The screen dimmed to black, then returned to the tiled grid. Another thumbnail glowed faintly at the corner, waiting without hurry. The house had settled under the weight of what I knew now, but it held. I walked it the way you walk a neighborhood you lived in as a child, and have borrowed again, gently touching the banister as if it were a relative. The hall opened toward the east, where the light thinly insisted through winter cloud. A door at the end of that hall had the heft of old purpose. The knob turned with a slow grace that made the hinge answer in a low hymn. The studio faced north. Painters like north light for a reason. It tells the truth without shouting. Someone Nathan had chased that truth across the room. Easels stood at attention. Flat files waited under a work table like quiet archivists. On the far wall, a blackout curtain divided the space, and behind it trays and larger chemical bottles, labeled with a teacher's hand. He'd remembered photography too. A sheet of tape clung to the edge of the table, a square of his writing on it. West wing mudroom freezer latch pull 3 inches. I felt ridiculous obeying a piece of tape. I obeyed anyway. The mudroom kept a practical shadow, the sort made by coats that mind their business and boots that have done their share. A chest freezer sat against the inner wall, white lid, immaculate plug line feeding into an outlet that didn't exist a decade ago. I slid the unit forward, the prescribed 3 inches. Something clicked not in the freezer, but behind it, a thick click a door remembering its job. The paneling to the right eased out a finger's width. I set my shoulder to it. The seam widened, then gave. Cold air reached like a hand from another decade. I stepped into a square room tiled in small white squares that had seen milk and steam and decisions. The old creamery. The air carried the ghost sweetness of dairy and a new clean hum. Racks of binders lined one wall. On another, a pegboard held tools arranged with a surgeon's neatness. Against the back, a metal table, and above it, a 3D topographic model. Under plexiglass ridges draws the ranch carved into elevation like a relief map. A smart kid makes for science fair and doesn't forget. In the corner, a server tower blinked its cool LEDs, polite as a heart monitor. A chime sounded on the laptop I'd carried like contraband. The next video opened on its own. The geofence Nathan had built into his files recognized the room the way a dog recognizes a whistle. Creamery, Nathan said, as if he could see me there. If you're in this room, you got past the freezer. You always were stronger than you wanted anyone to guess. The ghost of a grin. This is where the paper lives that isn't paper. He gestured to the model. What you're looking at is the land the way it behaves, not the way it's remembered. I hired 3 teams to read it properly. Their reports are in the binders and duplicated on the server. If you don't care for jargon, look for the red shading. It's a simple truth drawn complicated. I traced a finger over the plexiglass. The western edge of the ranch, scrubby on the drive-in, bloomed under the plastic with a deeper red like a bruise deciding whether to keep it secret. Footsteps scuffed behind me. "You're Evie then," a woman said from the doorway, voice soft prairie with a burr of elsewhere. I turned. She stood with a posture that kept its own counsel, thick braid tucked into the collar of a wool coat, hands empty to show no harm. 50-something, maybe more eyes the exact blue of winter at 4 in the afternoon. "I'm Maeve O'Rourke," she said. "Mr. Hale hired me to manage the horses and mind the place when he wasn't here. He told me when the time came you'd be the one walking through doors like this." "How did you—" "Your car," she said, answering the question I hadn't finished. Gate camera pinged. "Also, the brothers were here earlier. I gave them frost and they took it." Her mouth went a line. "Saw the constable on his way down. You handled it." "Today," I said. The word felt like a bench I could sit on. Maeve stepped in without asking, because people who know barns know when a door is for them. She ran a palm along the metal table as if assessing it for use. "He did this right," she said, not admiring, just accurate. "Didn't cheap out. When he was sickest, he still came monthly. Grew a beard for a while. Looked like a man practicing being someone else. Never was, though." I studied the binders. Each spine wore a date range and a neat label: Hydrology, Subsurface Title, and Easements Communications. The last one unsettled me for reasons I couldn't explain. I took it down. Inside copies of emails printed in tabbed names I didn't recognize, a few I did. He told you much, I asked. Maeve shook her head. Enough to do my job, enough to know who to trust. He said your name like a place you could stand in a storm. The laptop chimed again. Nathan's face returned same room, different day. If you're still here, you've met Maeve, he said. If you haven't, you will. She kept the animal sound and the cruise honest. Maeve crossed herself without drama, an old habit arriving to its cue. Nathan's voice softened. When men come to your door and say family, understand their grammar. Family in their mouths means assets. Don't let the word work on you more than the facts do. The video ended. The server hummed. Somewhere in the house, a radiator ticked its reliable tick, century-old iron doing a day's work, no fuss. Maeve and I stood with the map between us like a compact. Tea, she asked at last. Yes, I said, and my voice came back to me from the tile unbroken. We slid the freezer gently into place, pressed the panel until the seam disappeared, and walked the length of the hall together. The house learned the rhythm of 2 sets of steps. In the kitchen, Maeve found the kettle by instinct. I sat hands flat on the table, the blue folder to my right, the laptop to my left, and the key warm in my pocket. The ordinary objects of the moment behaved themselves. The window showed the wind lift powder off the drift line, then set it down again. Maeve poured the tea and set the mug where my hand had already decided to be. Steam made a brief geography between us. He kept lists. She set eyes on the kettle as if it were a shy animal. Not the kind people write to feel busy, the kind that finish things. He always did, I said. I thought I was the list. She took that in without commentary. Outside, the wind pushed powder against the step, then let it slide back like it had changed its mind. The house had that winter stillness old places get when they're listening. My phone vibrated on the table. Lila. Put it on speaker if you want, Maeve said, already reaching for a tin of shortbread, as if hospitality could anchor anything. Hey, I answered. Mom, I just heard from someone named Grant Hale. Lila's voice did its capable office cadence, the one that kept panic off the clock. He says he's Dad's brother. He and 2 others want to make peace over lunch. The way he said peace had quotes around it. They're at the ranch, I said. They brought a police officer earlier to try for an inspection. Documents held. So they're exactly what they sound like. Yes. She breathed not quite a sigh. Good. I prefer problems with names. There's a place 10 miles south of you on 22 called Red Wheel Diner. If I book a flight tonight, I can be there by noon tomorrow, but I don't like the idea of them having me trapped at a table without you. We'll meet today, I said. You and me first. Same diner. 1 hour. A beat of relief. Text me the time. And Mom, bring whatever Dad left that proves a point fast. After we hung up, Maeve slid me the tin. You'll want something in you. This country burns through butter like a sin. I ate a cookie I didn't taste, and packed with the clarity grief. Sometimes Grant's laptop. The blue folder, a phone photo I'd taken of the creamery model with the red bloom under the western edge. I sent Lila the time. Maeve handed me a knit cap that had hung by the back door long enough to become part of the house. You drive, she said. I'll come behind in the truck, not to hover, just to be seen. The red wheel sat low to the highway, a rectangle of neon and sincerity. Inside, a waitress with a name tag that said, BV called everyone hon without apology. Laminated menus stuck a little to my fingers. Coffee arrived before I asked, the good kind that tasted like 3 a.m. choices. Lila came in 5 minutes early, hair half tucked into a wool headband coat, the city kind that pretends it can handle prairie wind and then learns humility. She hugged me hard as if checking I wasn't an idea. You look thin, she said. You look employed, I said. We sat. The soundscape was Forks, a hockey game recap. A small boy arguing with pancakes. Lila cleared a space with her hands like she needed a neutral ground on the table. They said Dad kept his distance because he was ashamed of his roots, she began. That he meant to bring us back to the fold that you disapproved. I let the lie sit there untouched until it bored itself. What did you say? That I was eating lunch with my mother and would call them after. She took a breath. I don't want to fight you, Mom. I just want a version of the truth I can hold. I slid the laptop out of its sleeve, set it between the syrup caddy and the salt. The playlist grid brightened as if recognizing effort. Some tiles were geo-fenced, others were not. One square carried a tiny label, hardly there, Lila, like a whisper someone had trusted the file to keep. I tapped it. Nathan filled the cheap diner light without embarrassing it. He was in the studio on the video. No, he was in our kitchen 10 years ago, the one with the wobbly table he had refused to replace because it knew our elbows. The camera was steady. His voice wasn't. Hey, kiddo, he said. If you're watching, I ran out of smart ways to stretch time. Lila's shoulders changed shape. She leaned in until her hair's clean smell mixed with coffee. I should have told you more, he said. I didn't because I wanted our ordinary days. I'm greedy that way. A breath then. When I left Canada at 18, it wasn't noble. It was survival. My brothers erased what was mine and called it family. I changed my name a little and learned how to be boring on paper. Easiest thing I ever did once I found your mom. He talked about numbers and signatures and a letter of authorization that wasn't. He didn't mention oil or geology or any of the hard nouns I had been juggling. He mentioned Lila's 6th grade science fair poster on mineral layers and the way she'd rolled her eyes at a teacher who thought shale was boring. I wanted a place for your mother that felt like her own eyesight, he said. Hollow didn't love me as a boy, so I made it love what she loves. The video ended without a manufactured comfort. Lila watched the black screen hold the shape of him a moment longer. Then she wiped her face with the heel of her hand in the unceremonious way she had when feelings arrived without an appointment. They lied, she said, not asking. They told a version that worked for them, I said. These are the outlines that work for us. I pulled up the photo of the creamery model. The plexiglass caught the diner lights, but the red under the western ridges read through glare like a stubborn fact. The rest of the ranch glowed a mild orange. That corner was a heart under a shirt. They told me the east is where the money is, Lila said, studying the contours. Talked about split lines that somehow avoided this section altogether. Their inspection order didn't reach the kitchen, I said. The constable knows what's civil and what's not. She traced nothing on the screen with a clean fingertip, the way people touch art they won't risk touching. If this holds, they were trying to sell us our own ignorance, Mom. Looks like. Bev deposited 2 burgers that could have fixed a smaller problem. Lila salted hers with the care of someone driving in snow. She ate half, then leaned back like she trusted the chair. I'm done letting people define my father for me, she said, and I'm done letting people define you. On the way out, I called Ms. Rowe from the vestibule with its bulletin board full of baseball sign-ups and a poster about a lost dog that likely had been found or forgotten. Reception grated against the glass but held. I need introductions, I said, quiet ones, to a party that enjoys seeing a rival embarrassed and can behave in a farmhouse. You're speaking my love language, Ms. Rowe said. Give me an hour. We stepped into air sharp enough to disclose a conscience. Maeve's truck was parked nose out, ready for anything that insisted. Lila linked her arm through mine for 4 paces, then let go like she trusted gravity again. Back at the ranch, the sky softened to late afternoon pewter. Maeve peeled off to the barn. I took Lila through the great room, slowly naming nothing as if the house would supply the nouns. At the window she stopped. He put the rose here on purpose, she said. He made a lot of purposes, I said. In the kitchen, we made more tea on principle. Lila's phone buzzed. She glanced down. Her mouth did a shape I hadn't seen since she was 13. Grant again, she said. He's outside the diner, apparently patient. Block, I said. She did. The thud of that decision landed between us and settled in. Evening came early, the way it does when the sun is a rumor. Maeve reappeared with the practiced economy of someone who brings news without turning it into theater. She wiped her boots, then set a small case on the table. Before we go farther, she said, unclasping it, this sticks inside a coat like a cussed idea. She pulled out a rectangle no bigger than a deck of cards wired to a condenser mic with a tiny spring clip. It records clean. He made me carry one when the crews were new. Lila arched an eyebrow. Dad was paranoid. Dad was alive, Maeve said, not unkind. I pinned the mic inside my collar. It ticked once to let me know it knew its job. After dark, the monitor in the creamery blinked a polite alert. A camera near the West Service Road had seen headlights pause where no one with sense pauses. The feed came up grainy, then competent an SUV idling with its lights off shape, too familiar. A figure got out, walked a few paces along the fence, disappeared behind the shadow of the windbreak, then reappeared at a different angle, like he was testing the perimeter, the way you test a story before you sell it, Victor Maeve said, and there was no triumph in her voice, just the tallying of what is. We let the porch light burn and left the rest of the house dark. Lila stood at the window and learned the rhythm of her own breath against glass. I sat with the blue folder open to a page that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with order. The radiator ticked and then didn't. Even metal listened. They idled past the main house twice slow as doubt then rolled back down the drive. Gravel carries wait long after the tires leave and the sound took its time to be done. Lila turned from the window. I hate being the kind of person who watches, she said. Watching is work, Maeve replied. Ask any horse. We didn't talk much after that. Words felt like a resource to spend carefully. I wiped the counter that didn't need wiping. Maeve set out heavy mugs that didn't rattle when a table shook. Lila stood with her hands in her coat pockets until she remembered she was warm and took them out. At some point, the kettle clicked off without anyone having turned it on. Steam rose and then thought better of it. I laid the key on the table between us, maple leaf charm catching the soft light, and let the house memorize the weight of 3 women in a room built to keep milk sweet. We set the house the way you set a stage, and then forget your acting. Maeve dragged the long table toward the window, so the light fell clean and even. Lila lined up water glasses until their rims made a level horizon. I laid out paper that mattered: deed copies, the title chain, tax receipts. The mic inside my collar warmed against my skin like a little animal awake for night. Ms. Rowe arrived without spectacle. She left her parka on a chair back and opened a leather folio that smelled like arguments won. "They'll want to talk first," she said, placing a pen exactly parallel to the table edge. "Let them." We were still deciding whether coffee or tea moved faster when tires sounded on gravel with the confidence of men who mistake noise for leverage. Maeve opened the front door and stood aside with the kind of politeness that can hold a line. Grant Hale entered first, followed by Victor and Ethan, each taking the room's measure as if it had asked their opinion. A fourth man came with them in an expensive parka that tried and failed not to look like a uniform. He introduced himself as Harrison Wells, North Axis Energy. His handshake was polished oak smooth heavy, meant to impress you with its weight. "Mrs. Carter," Grant said, "appreciate you receiving us on short notice." I gestured to the chairs. "Ironwood doesn't refuse guests. We just like names on the invitations." They sat. Ms. Rowe remained standing until they settled, then took her seat at my right. Lila sat to my left, shoulders squared, not performing bravery, practicing it.
Grant folded his hands. "We understand there's confusion about intentions here. We don't want contention. This is about family history and common sense. Ironwood Hollow has always been a Hale concern. The equitable solution is a division of use, east structures remaining with you and your daughter, western and mineral interests handled by us through North Axis. Mrs. Carter would receive a generous stipend, family peace restored."
"Define generous," Ms. Rowe said, her tone so courteous it almost apologized for accuracy. Wells slid a sheet across the table, a grid of numbers, decimals aligned like soldiers. "Based on our preliminary valuations, an annual payment indexed to market more than sufficient for upkeep. The West Ridge isn't really usable as pasture anyway," he added, benign. Lila lifted the paper, looked at it as if it were a menu she didn't intend to order from, then set it face down. "How do you define us?" she asked. The family, Victor said, a smile that missed its target.
"Not corporate. Family."
I let my hand find the clicker under the folder and pressed it. The shade dropped soundlessly from a recess in the ceiling. The projector on the sideboard woke with a soft cough. The wall bloomed with topography, the ranch in raised light and shadow drawn from the 3D model in the creamery and rendered into lines that said what the land already knew. "This," I said, "is Ironwood Hollow." A slow turn of heads. Wells leaned forward, professional interest briefly outrunning strategy. Grant kept his eyes on me, refusing the map on principle. I clicked again. The contours filled with color, a soft orange across most of the acres, and along the western uplands a deeper red that gathered like a secret someone had mistaken for emptiness. A legend sat in the corner: subsurface potential verified by 3 independent teams, dates aligned to each report. Wells's mouth did not move, but everything else about him did. "Where did you get these studies?" he asked, forced casual.
"From the land," I said. "Read correctly."
Victor looked at Grant. Ethan looked at the window. Their tails were small and quick like mice at the edge of a field. Ms. Rowe placed a second folio on the table, fanned its contents like cards. "Affidavits from the survey teams," she said. "Copies for you if you ask nicely. And before we wander clarity, Mrs. Carter holds clear title to surface and mineral rights. There is no equitable division to be compelled or implied. Any offer proceeds from that fact, not nostalgia." Grant steepled his fingers. "We're not here to litigate. We're here to settle."
"You came with the company man," Lila said. "That's a negotiation, not a settlement."
The kitchen door swung on its hinges the way a good entrance does when it's timed. Maeve reappeared, not alone. A man in a dark suit the color of dry riverbed stepped in with her, followed by a woman with a canvas portfolio and a second attorney I did not know. He set his leather gloves on the sideboard as if he were setting down a small animal to sleep. "Mrs. Carter," he said, offering a card. "Thomas Reeves, Frontier Meridian. We were told you had something we'd like to see. We came to do that politely."
Grant half rose. "What is this?"
"A meeting," Ms. Rowe said mildly, "with all the parties whose opinions might matter to my client. North Axis has had your ear. Frontier deserves theirs." Wells turned to Grant. "You told me you had authority to negotiate." "I have influence," Grant snapped before remembering he was trying to be gracious. Reeves watched their exchange the way an astronomer watches a predictable eclipse, interested, not surprised. He looked at the projection, then at the legend, then at the 3 dates in the corner of the screen. "These are good readers," he said to me, which was a compliment in his language. "You have the subsurface mapped cleaner than half the juniors in this basin." I didn't correct the "you." I clicked again. The environmental overlays came up: hydrology, wildlife corridors, winter access tolerances, a stack of transparencies that told you how to touch a place without bruising it. "This is my offer," I said, and slid a 1-page term sheet to the center of the table. Paper that knows its job doesn't need to be long. Grant didn't reach for it. Wells did. He read with his jaw quiet and his eyebrows deciding whether to lift. Reeves's attorney read, then handed it to Reeves, who read slower as if language deserved time.
The terms were not a speech, a three-part structure. First, North Axis acknowledges no standing and withdraws from any putative negotiation. The Hale brothers withdraw any objection to Title C's contact with me and with my daughter, except through counsel, and agree to non-disparagement. In exchange, certain documents in my possession remain unopened and undisseminated. Second Frontier Meridian receives an exclusive right to negotiate a limited development agreement focused on the Eastern Tract, with any West Ridge exploration deferred until baseline monitoring is complete. Third, if any clause is breached, all concessions evaporate, and the documentation packets I'd prepared find their intended destinations. Wells's eyes paused halfway down the page. These environmental thresholds, he said. Flaring bands, leak detection intervals, surface disturbance caps. A community restoration fund burdened on net rather than gross. Are non-negotiable, I said. If you want this field, you'll earn it in air and water first and money second. Reeves set the paper down. I can live with these, he said. We've modeled tighter constraints in Alaska. It costs more. It lasts longer. Grant finally spoke to me, the shape of his voice no longer social. You don't understand what you're giving up. I understand what I'm not selling, I said. Victor opened his mouth, thought better, closed it again. Ethan studied his hands like he'd never seen them. Ms. Rowe slid 3 sealed envelopes across to the Hale brothers, one each name's written in her clean hand. For your counsel, she said. Inventory lists of communications related to prior transactions in your names. Mr. Wells, there's a separate letter for North Axis regarding misrepresentations of standing. Read before you reply. Wells looked at the envelope as if it had hissed, I was told. You were told many things, Ms. Rowe said. You're being told the truth now. Reeves cleared his throat, not to perform, but to move the air along. Mrs. Carter, if we sign the Memorandum of Understanding attached to your sheet, my team can start baseline studies within a month. Your restoration fund structure is novel but possible. We'll appoint a joint trustee. We'll also agree to your pause right if thresholds are crossed. I nodded. Then we're in agreement about the shape of the room. Grant pushed his chair back an inch. The sound was small and angry. This is extortion in a dress. Say it to the microphone, Lila said, and the quiet that followed had more weight than any shout. He didn't. He looked at Wells. Wells didn't look back. Reeves folded his gloves and set them on top of his card again. Ms. Rowe capped her pen. Ethan was the one who stood first. Grant, he said not loud. The word wasn't a warning, it was a mercy. Grant stayed seated a heartbeat longer than Rose, like a man deciding between doors that led to the same hallway. He nodded to me without affection. We'll review. You do that, Ms. Rowe said. Counsel only. They left in reverse order, Wells first, then Victor, then Ethan, Grant last. The air they took with them rewove itself around the space they'd claimed. Maeve closed the door and set the bolt in a way that did not announce itself. Reeves and his attorney remained. He signed the memorandum without performative pauses, a signature that looked legible even at speed. We'll have our environmental people call yours, he said. We prefer science that is dull and correct. Good, I said. We prefer the same. When they were gone, the house returned to itself. The projector fan spun down. The shade slipped back up into its slot, as if it had never been there. Ms. Rowe gathered the signed pages and tapped them into a neat spine on the table that had already learned too many stories. Maeve refilled water like that was the point all along. Lila leaned forward and pressed her forehead to the cool of the tabletop for a count of 5, then sat back up, eyes clear as if the room had rinsed them. Hungry, Maeve asked. Yes, Lila said, surprised to hear it. The kettle agreed in its small way. I slipped the mic from my collar and set it beside the key. The maple leaf charm caught the late light and held it quiet and certain as the house absorbed what had been said within its walls. By morning, the wind had cleaned the sky down to bone. Sun on the crusted drifts threw light back at the house as if to test its windows. Maeve salted the porch, then left for the barn with the kind of cheer that belongs to people who trust work. Lila and I cleared the table, put papers in their folders, put the key where hands could find it without looking. We were pouring coffee when tires sounded on the drive, unhurried, uninvited. Maeve stepped in from the mudroom, breath white at her shoulder. 2 cars, she said. One's the brothers. I pinned the recorder in my collar without ceremony. Lila set her mug down and stood to the side of the doorway, not hiding, simply not giving them the center. Grant entered thinner than pride allows Victor and Ethan flanking him. With them came a doctor carrying a leather bag and a lawyer whose briefcase looked heavier than its contents. Hats stayed in their hands. Entitlement doesn't need the extra height, Mrs. Carter, Grant said. We need a few minutes. He glanced toward Lila and recalibrated his tone. It's personal. Then say it plain, I said. The doctor stepped forward, eyes trained to deliver bad news gently. I'm Dr. Harmon.
Mr. Hale has advanced liver disease. There's a window for a partial transplant from a compatible living donor. Given the family markers, your daughter may be a candidate for evaluation." Silence held long enough to learn its outline. Lila's jaw worked once, then stilled. "You came to ask my child to give you a piece of herself," I said, the recorder warm against my throat. "Just testing," the lawyer added quickly. "Purely preliminary." "And if she matches," I asked. Grant swallowed. "Then we would be grateful for her consideration." Lila took one step forward. "And why me?" she asked, voice calm as cold. "Why not someone closer to the man asking?" Dr. Harmon's gaze flicked to his notes. "Siblings have been assessed. Not compatible." "No other options," Victor said, as if facts could be shoved into place with a shoulder. "There are always other options," I said. I opened the communications binder, slid free a thin envelope I had not touched until now. Nathan's hand on the front for Grant only if necessary. The paper felt older than the week had a right to be. I set it where Grant's hand already hovered. "From Nathan," I said. "Read here." He broke the seal. His face changed pace line by line. The lawyer read over his shoulder. Ethan leaned in. Victor stayed very still and watched the air between us as if it might speak. When Grant looked up, the room had another temperature. He knew he said not asking. "He learned after his diagnosis," I said. "Your father kept a second family, a son and a daughter in Saskatoon. Nathan verified their markers and their lives, then chose not to use them for anything but truth. Their names and current contacts are in that letter. If you're making requests, you start there, with honesty." The doctor nodded once the way a man nods when a door he didn't know existed opens in the hall he's been walking. Grant held the envelope as if it might lift. His voice emptied of strategy. "And if they refuse?" "Then you ask Lila," I said, "and you accept her answer without framing it as debt." Lila didn't look at me. She looked at Grant. "If you reach me, it will be through counsel," she said. "No calls, no lunches. Put the facts in writing." Victor drew breath to protest, then let it go. Ethan touched Grant's sleeve like a man reminding another where the edge of a step is. Dr. Harmon closed his bag. "We'll go," he said. They turned as a group that wasn't one. At the door, Grant paused. The winter light flattened his face to boyhood. "He could have called me," he said, "not to anyone in particular." "He did what he could," I said. "So will we." The door shut with the soft authority of old wood. Maeve slid the bolt because that's what bolts are for. No one spoke for a while. The house rearranged its listening. Lila poured the cold coffee back in the pot and set it to warm, as if routine were a form of spine. "I'm going to the barn," she said. "I want to meet the horses in daylight I can name." I watched from the kitchen window while she crossed the yard, head down against the bright. Maeve met her at the gate and put a hand on her shoulder before showing her the latch that sticks. In the distance, the stall doors opened one by one like pages turning. I carried the laptop to the studio. The north light had a clean edge. It made dust honest. I didn't press play. I let the quiet of that room do the talking. On the work table, I laid out paper trays, tongs, the simple grammar of a darkroom. From a roll I'd shot 2 days earlier, I clipped to frame Lila in profile at the diner window, steam feathering the glass eyes, working on numbers only she could see. The red lamp came on. The room gentled. I slipped the paper through developer stop fix, the old alchemy finding its pace in my hands again. Grain by grain, the image lifted out of blankness, the line of her cheek. The stubborn mouth, the light on the glass that didn't care and cared. When it cleared, I pegged the print to dry and leaned back. Somewhere pipes ticked. Somewhere below us, Maeve laughed once, a small bright sound, and a horse answered with a stamp-like punctuation. I opened the window a finger to let the cold remind the room who was boss, then closed it again, because ease has its place. On the way downstairs, I paused in the great room. The projector was gone. The wall was only wall. The rose on the desk had darkened but still held its shape. I set the key beside it and left my hand on both for a count of 3. By afternoon, the sun had moved enough to make new angles from old beams. Lila came in with hay in her hair and a warmth that didn't belong to the furnace. We ate soup Maeve claimed wasn't worth writing down and will never be replicated. Later, when the light thinned into evening, I took the print from the line and set it where it could be seen without being announced. The house learned our names. The wind laid down. The day finished without ceremony, which was its own kind of mercy. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.